Open Tobias Harris, and Tobias drills it! Sixers up one!
Embiid fakes, Embiid down the lane!
What is going on, guys, and welcome back to the Pick Swap podcast right here on Pick Swap Media. My name is Sean Barnard, as always, and here with the man, the myth, the legend, James Birrane, who was in the building for the absolute massacre of Nikola Jokic and the Denver Nuggets last night. We are learning what we knew all along, that Joel Embiid is the best player in the planet, the best player walking in the NBA, and the guy that should deservingly win MVP as long as he plays enough games. So for the man that was in the building, James, what's our vibe check? How are we feeling today?
Yeah, last night was a lot of fun. I'll tell you what, it was nice to see this team. You know, we'll talk about the Embiid and just everything about what he was able to do. But you look at the team go toe with the reigning champs. Obviously, they have changed a little bit, but not very much. That's the core of a team that won a championship. And the Sixers, without some of their depth, obviously Melton and Rocco and some of these guys weren't available. And they went toe to toe with the champs, start to finish. Whether it was, second half of defense, the first half of offense, they did a little bit of everything. And it was a weird, Nick Nurse said it was a strange game. It was kind of a weird flow of a game, but they came out on top and it was really great to see.
Yeah, definitely. And I want to touch on that, attack that in a couple different directions. I want to begin by talking about the Sixers versus Nuggets kind of team matchup, then dive specifically into the Joel Embiid versus Nikola matchup, Nikola Jokic matchup like that, and then kind of talk about some schematic stuff as far as the guarding. Obviously, we didn't see a ton of the head-to-head Jokic versus Embiid as I think some people were anticipating, and kind of some of the problems that brought on with the rebounding and things as a whole. But let's just kick things off with this. The Sixers as a team, I think, needed that win. That even though, you can argue you don't win championships in January, there's a lot of balls still left to be played, but to just be able to look the defending champions in the eye on the second day of a back-to-back after taking down the Houston Rockets the day before, a game where Joel Embiid returned after missing the previous 10 days, to really call for call, answer that team all game long, I think is a statement. So from a team perspective, how much do you think this one means to the Sixers, James?
Yeah, I think it's kind of funny because you look at this situation like one of two ways. You can either look at it, if you lost, you'd be like, it's a game in January, it doesn't matter, it's not a measuring stick. But then you look at it when you win, and it's like, wow, that was a really, really important feel-good victory. But the fact of the matter, it definitely is, right? When you're able to do that against one of, if not the best team in the NBA right now with, Jokic, who's a two-time MVP, and they just have a really, they're well put together. I would give them a lot of credit. They are really well put together. And they're going to be competing for a championship just like they did last year. So when you can, score with them and keep up on that, and then in the second half when it turned into a little bit of a more defensive minded game, they definitely made some adjustments. You're able to stick with them that way as well and get contributions from a lot of different people in a lot of different ways. And we'll obviously talk about the different people who are able to contribute to that. But, at the end of the day, you were able to, obviously on your home floor, but even with some adversity, you were able to beat that team who is, one of the true contenders in the NBA. So you always feel good about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And this Nuggets team is still absolutely the real deal. That this is not a team that took a massive step back after winning last year. I know they lost Bruce Brown, a couple other pieces along the edges, but it's that same core. And one of the things that stood out to me about this Nuggets team is a potential, I guess, problem from a matchup standpoint for the Sixers team is just the size. And this is not a unique issue to the Sixers. And I think what brought that on specifically, to what highlighted it in this matchup, was the decision to allow Joel Embiid to be a roamer, to have another man fronting Jokic and tackling that as the matchup. We saw this last year as well with PJ Tucker being the guy that was the primary matchup for Jokic. Saw a great deal of success in that specific game. That was a second half adjustment by Doc Rivers, a rare one that we ever saw from Doc making that change there. But that did kind of turn the tides of that. It makes a ton of sense from the Sixers perspective that this is not Embiid ducking Jokic. That what this means is Embiid is incredibly valuable as a rim protector, and that you don't play to his strengths by taking him away from the paint. And I get the frustrations that, some guys would like to just see this one-on-one matchup or see him move out to the perimeter for it to be this less, King Kong versus Godzilla matchup that we kind of expected. But I love what they did from the Nuggets side of things, they did something similar. A lot of Aaron Gordon on Embiid, and not a ton of the one-on-one matchup either. That's definitely more so from the perspective of not allowing Jokic to get into foul trouble, which we know Embiid is so artful at, and people have plenty of words about that as well. So what's your thoughts on kind of the decision to do that, and what did you think of the results of it?
Yeah, I think I was pro both sides doing it. I think obviously for different reasons. And I don't even want to be in the party of saying like, oh, Jokic can't guard him. He definitely is not as equipped as Aaron Gordon. Aaron Gordon is a high class defender. He's just big and strong, and he's also quick and has great hands, and he's a good rebounder. Like putting him on Joel is definitely not even really a knock at Jokic more as it is he's our best defensive weapon. We have to use him here and allow Jokic, who's a smart defender, to kind of coach the defense and quarterback the defense from the back line. And same thing with Joel. He's such a great rim protector, and on that end, Jokic pulls him out, and if Embiid's not at the rim, him being 18 to 20 feet from the basket with Jokic actually playing quarterback for their offense, it negates his ability and what makes him so special defensively. So it makes no sense to pull him out there. And then at times when it came down to it, I felt comfortable when Joel did have to go out there and say, he's scoring a lot, I got to take this into my own hands. And they did that later in the game, which was nice to see. And honestly, just a really classy performance from Joel. Just something that on all fronts, passed the ball really well. Obviously, we'll talk about all this stuff, but he was just very top to bottom, button up, and did a really professional job on Jokic for the most part.
Yeah, and let's get right into the Joel Embiid side of things here. That 39 minutes, 41 points, 10 assists, and 7 rebounds. He did snap the consecutive streak of 30 and rebounds, but still keeps alive the consecutive double-doubles by having these assists. This was a different way that we've seen Joel Embiid dominate a game. That the playmaking standpoint, the reads that he was making, I was really impressed by. There were a couple where Jokic genuinely didn't know where to be defensively, and a lot of that was Joel just being able to manipulate things in a way that I really just have not seen him do. So really cool to kind of see him take those steps. And I guess I'll swing the question to you, James. Is Joel Embiid the best passing big man in the league?
No. No, Joel when he wants to be, when that's part of the game plan. And when he I feel obviously in a night like last night, he's gonna feel that person. He's very smart. He knew what was going on. He wanted to make sure that he, moved the ball well. And it's so nice to see that because he has that ability. And I know for sure that when it comes down to it, Nurse and him and all, the team is going to put together something in the postseason where when teams want to make life more difficult, they're going to have to dig into that, which they did do in the Nets series. I think if you go back and watch that, he did a really good job of that. But for him, he was, like I said, he did everything on the floor, but offensively, he's a juggernaut at that point. You really can't stop him. The only times you find a way to stop Joel is when he's so headstrong on trying to score the basketball that he maybe puts himself in not the most advantageous situations. For him, when he's allowing himself to take what the defense gives him, what are you going to do? If he, he made a really nice pass to Pat Bev under the basket. He made multiple weak side passes to corner shooters, Tobias a couple of times, Nico Batum once or twice. And when he's able to do that, puts him on a different level. I do, the only thing I can say is the rebounding was not good last night, and Jokic got him a couple of times. Who's, he's great at that, but I needed to see a little bit more, obviously, from him defensively. He was great. The board, it wasn't just him, but the team in general rebounded pretty poorly.
Yeah, definitely. And I do say the best passer in jest for sure, that I do not think he's taken quite those steps yet, but he's absolutely tightened the gap a little bit. That it doesn't feel like this crater size Jokic is this elite playmaker and Joel Embiid has no clue how to do it. It feels like Joel Embiid, I would say, is a good passer for a big man at this point, which is huge progress. 6.2 assists per game, a career high for him in that. And some of these have been far more advanced reads than I expected. But in the past, he's been at the 4.2 assists per game mark the past 2 seasons. And a lot of those just felt like, kick it out to a guy on the perimeter and they shoot a three to either make or miss. Like those were the Joel Embiid assists. Feels like this year and last night specifically, like he created a lot of them in a way that I have not really seen from him. One really sticks in my mind where he looked off Jokic. At this point, Jokic was kind of floating and he looked off, kicked to the corner, and I forget who knocked down the shot, but it was one that was like Joel full out created that lane as a pass. And that is a huge step for him. And what makes Jokic so dangerous as a player is you can't double him as a scorer because he will punish you as a passer. And you can't leave him one-on-one because he's good enough to get to his spots and score that way. we're starting to see Joel head down this path. And when he's able to continue growing this, that's been the way that the Sixers have been beaten in years past, is that Joel has not been able to handle these double teams. He's gotten too headstrong, as you said, where he forces up shots, kind of forces his way into things in a way that he shouldn't. Sometimes it's stubbornness. Sometimes it's just a lack of an ability of reading things. And all those look to be significantly better this year. And it's so funny to me, too, how when we think of like a healthy shot diet in the NBA, it's like the opposite of Joel Embiid, that mid-ranges are essentially non-existent in today's NBA. And his are just so automatic, man. Like, if you're Aaron Gordon and Joel Embiid is jab stepping at the top of the elbow and just settling for that jumper, you think you're doing your job. But, like, you're not, because he's that good at it and that elite at it. And it's amazing to me for, like, that to be the calling card of his game, based on, like, when you think of the Joel Embiid that we first saw in the basketball court, like, even dating back to the Kansas days, it was not that type of player by any means. And just the touch that he has on all these shots, he truly is one of the greatest scorers of all times, going to go down as an all-time great and in the prime of his career. And cool to see him do it against his, I guess, biggest foe to some extent.
Yeah, I think we've all kind of seen, I'm sure people that listen and pay attention have gotten to see these performances over the years. And you think back to the first 40-point game he had against the Lakers, and where most of that game was getting downhill and in the post. And obviously he sprinkled in those jumpers, and, you know, even those times where we're like, he is getting to be an all-star, you know, all NBA caliber player. In the last 3 seasons, the, you know, just the unbelievable growth in those areas. And like you said, I'd never think a shot of his is not going to go in. Even when it's a ridiculous, terrible shot, I'm like, it might go in. He's allowed to take it. And yesterday he hit a lot of those, and a lot of, you know, shots where I thought he did a great job of just getting to a nice spot, being comfortable. And then obviously Aaron Gordon reaching in, and they were just, you know, I also wanted to point out one of the plays last night you mentioned of him, like, creating a shot for somebody else. He, like, was at the right wing and drove into the middle, and then actually dished it down to Oubre on kind of like a no-look, like, drop-off, and Oubre dunked it. Like, you mentioned that before. It's definitely one of the parts of his game where it takes him to a spot where you can't put the 2 guys on him, so those jumpers are just free. If you give him any space at all, it's just free. It's going in every time. And for him, it's like, I hope in the playoffs when they, you know, get to that point, and that's going to be the only thing we keep going back to, but it feels like they've gotten to a point where he's smart enough to know how to create and when to, you know, go for himself. So we'll see how it ends up playing out then.
And for the Nuggets fans that I'm sure will be in the comments talking about the lack of one-on-one, bring it, man. Like, Nikola Jokic cannot guard Joel Embiid by any definition of it. That little, the Euro step on the fast break is probably the coolest moment to me. That was kind of a signature step by, and not that you can, you know, pin that down on Jokic completely. That's a difficult spot as a defender regardless. But there's just no shot. Like, I've fought this battle for years. You can't convince me that Jokic is a good defender. He's just straight up not. He doesn't have the athleticism. He does have the nice brains, and he does have some nice instincts, I guess. He puts himself in the right spot, but he's just too limited on that side of the floor. And I'm sick of pretending like that's not the case. I've done it far too often. I've tried to talk myself into it and even squint and see moments where he does turn it on a little bit. But he's a below average defender, and it's always going to be that way. He's good enough offensively for that to be okay, but the facts are the facts of that, and you can spit whatever defensive rating and VORP at me. You watch the game a couple times. He just can't compete with a player near Joel Embiid's caliber, or even if you want to throw him like a Domantas Sabonis or Bam Adebayo, those guys are giving Jokic the work on the defensive side of the ball as well. So did want to make sure I made that clear. And James, I know I mentioned you being in the building. What was kind of the vibes of it in there? What was the energy of that crowd like? Because to me, this felt like, from watching over the TV, that this felt like the most exciting game of the season from inside there.
Yeah, I mean, it was like no holds barred right from the beginning. Like, both teams shot extremely well from the field. There was a really good flow to it, and the people reacted that way. Like, it was energetic the whole time. From, you know, the teams were just, you know, there was some at points, there was some fouls, and those build up in a second. But when you get back to that flow, and, you know, both teams are super talented on both ends. And I think for the most part, everyone was like, with Jokic, like, obviously the MVP chants were a little bit louder, which is always great towards the end of the game. And felt like people, you know, you really felt that one. I feel like it does feel personal for us because of how much time we've spent battling between the two of them. But I left there with a ton of respect for Jokic. I feel like seeing those guys up close, and you know, just how big those two guys are playing against each other. It's mind blowing, and he makes the game look so easy, Nikola Jokic. But obviously Joel was, you know, those moments to the end of the first half with the Oubre lob layup and then come back around to the Tobias dunk.
Yep.
That was just you feel those moments and you're like, I want to feel like that the entire time. But yeah, dude, it was an incredible experience I think everyone there was sold out to the top. So it was great.
Yeah, and I had a nice reminder myself of I kind of had to, roll over to swallow the L after that Nuggets run last year. It was a nice feeling last night to remember how much I hate all Nuggets fans, man. Not all Nuggets fans, but the ones that are the loudest for sure. And starting right at the opening tip when people are trying to make a big deal of the national media about like the Sixers going with the sucks after every intro as if that isn't done at literally every single event. Every game for the Sixers, every game in Philly. And like you go to a high school and you'll see this. Like this is not unique to Philadelphia. That just happens. So wild there. But luckily my hatred was shifted quickly. I did not have the benefit of being in the arena. So instead I had the punishment of listening to Stan Van Gundy on the call. And good Lord, James, like to give my quick bullet points and then we can get back to talking about basketball here. A couple quotes that actually came out of Stan Van Gundy's mouth was Tobias Harris might be one of the most underrated players in the entire NBA. He also went on a full fight. Yeah. I tweeted, all other 29 teams, listen up here, man. Go get him. Go get this near all-star right here. But also he brought up Tobias Harris like 6 or 7 times about what a great fit. Another quote was they can't do better than Tobias Harris as a third option on this team. And elaborate on that quite a bit as I don't understand why people don't see that. Which, in fairness, like the best version of Tobias, you can see it, which was yesterday. 24 points, played very well, 8 of 10 from the field. And that's kind of the biggest frustrating point about Tobias is it's there for short doses, but it's not for the long haul, and it has not been in the postseason for the most part. He has had a couple of decent playoffs, so I'll give him that respect. And then the most frustrating part about Stan Van Gundy is in the middle of the third quarter, as Embiid was kind of hitting his stride for the game, like really the point where he was dicing it up, getting in his bag. And this is where he was really scoring the ball at a high level. Stan Van Gundy's just going on this soliloquy about like the lack of playoff success that Embiid has had and bring up his percentages, the way his shooting splits go down, diving through every single number, which I get the point. It's not an invalid point. I understand. But he was blatantly ruining what I would consider one of the best NBA basketball games of the entire season. And just make it about the game, man. You're there to call the game to the point where his partner on the mic was like interjecting, trying to cut him off and trying to change the subject. But Stan Van Gundy was not having it, that he just kept shifting things back to it. And my biggest frustration, aside from the fact that I hate how lame that narrative are, and one final point to slip on, he also talked about how the Sixers ran Ben Simmons out of town, how a ton of revisionist history about the Philadelphia basketball. But my biggest point in frustration is like, your job as the announcer is to make it about the game, that you're there to call this game. You're there to let the game be the story. You are not the story. So Stan Van Gundy absolutely hated it. Hope I never have to hear his voice on a call again. And James, I'm very, very jealous of you for not having to hear that go through your ears.
Yeah, I heard only bad things on Twitter. Like you text me during the game and some other people text me and were like, oh my God, I can't do this anymore. And I saw obviously all that on Twitter. So I'm glad I didn't have to listen to that. I get frustrated with those guys. And it's a shame because there are some good crews out there that would do a good job, but it feels like every time, something like this. And I think that was nice to watch it without having to feel angry one way or another, but just like, dude, these are two great teams that are really playing some of their best basketball with both their stars who are, the contingent MVPs and maybe the two biggest stars in the NBA on the floor at the same time. And you only want to talk about what's bad about one guy or what's bad about the other guy. Why don't you just watch the game? Because I think that's like the prototype of game that if you wanted to get somebody into basketball, like 100%. I think you would show them that game. And that's coming from just a fan perspective. Like Jokic was awesome. Michael Porter was awesome. Jamal Murray's fun to watch. That team is really well coached. And it was like a ton of adjustments on both sides. Like Nick Nurse was changing their defense constantly. And then Mike Malone would counter and then he would counter back. It was a fun game to watch. So I feel like it's just such a shame that the guys that are supposed to be the biggest fans and the coaches and the people that are like ambassadors for basketball, that's the way that they go about doing their job. It's just kind of dumb.
Yeah, it's lame. It's frustrating, and it ruined it. Like that ruined my viewing experience last night. And I know I'm not alone in that. That should have been like one of the best. It still is one of the best games of the season from a basketball perspective. But from pure viewing enjoyment experience, it just wasn't, and that sucks. And I will remember that for Stan Van Gundy. So I do want to highlight a couple other guys here. We mentioned Tobias with 24 points, 5 rebounds, 4 assists, shot 8 of 10 from the field, got to the line 6 times, which is a lot for Tobias. Also saw Tyrese Maxey add 25 points of his own, 9 assists for Maxey, had 5 rebounds, shot 4 of 9 from 3. He got to the free throw line 7 times as well. Any takeaways from those two specifically?
Tobias's run, I guess early fourth quarter when they were down and then they brought it back up. And I believe when Joel came back in, it was tied and they were down by, I don't know, 6 or 7 or something. And they clawed their way back in. Tobias down that stretch, dude, was everything to them. He was a lifeline to offense. And I feel like if, those are the times that make or break a team, like where in the position that the Sixers are in, and in those minutes that Joel is not on the floor and, they're all their focus is on Tyrese. Tobias being able to find that and the flow and the confidence in that moment, what he's been able to capture when Joel was out, those times are really important for him and he capitalized there. And Tyrese was just super solid. Kind of everywhere. He was, obviously he had some moments defensively where he got switched on Jokic and that's just, not much he can do with that. But he was just really fantastic. He, took what the defense gave him, shooting the basketball. He, it's nice to see those go in again. He was kind of like, I don't want to say struggling because he was so, he's still Tyrese. But when they're going in like that, what did he shoot from 3?
He was 4 of 9 from 3.
4 of 9. Like, that's great. That's
Perfect.
awesome.
Yeah.
And some of them were really important, really big threes, and it helps, give Joel some space. So he needs that. He attacked the basket really well, and he didn't turn the ball over against a really, really good defense, a good smart defense that was definitely doing their best to slow him down. So just 2 really good performances from those guys. And Tyrese, every game looks like a better tandem with Joel and Tobias. I never try to get too high or too low on Tobias. He's always going to find his way back here, but he's been looking really good. So you got to give him credit.
Yeah, assassin scorer, as we've come to know, man. And in all seriousness, like if he is around after the deadline, I will talk myself into Tobias. Like
I think he's going to be here.
I think it's more likely than not. I would agree with you. And he is capable that if he goes on a heater at the right time, he could be a vital part of a playoff run. That like we do see these stretches where he is the right mix for this team. We have to bank on hitting one of those at the right time come postseason time. And it absolutely not drying up at the wrong time, which is also, we've seen that plenty of times as well. But Tobias, like he was excellent last night. He does deserve his flowers. And as you said, he was kind of a lifeline for that offense throughout that fourth quarter stretch, the shot creation and really impressive stuff. And from Maxey, I just want to note how awesome it is and how awesome he is that these aren't great games anymore, that him finishing with 25 and 9 is a casual shrug it off. I felt even stronger that way during that Rockets game. I was actually in the building for that one, checking out that game. And he finished with 27 points, hit 6 threes, and it felt like he didn't even play that good. And the fact that it's like, this is the normal for him, this is the standard where the bar is set, that's really telling about a player. And shout out to Tyrese Maxey for continuing to develop, continuing to just reach that level. And very cool how much this continues. So a couple other guys that I want to make sure I shout out here. First off, Nico Batum, man. Straight up untouchable. That when I'm making the list of this team, it is Joel Embiid, it is Tyrese Maxey, and then it is Nico Batum for the players that I am not trading. He is going to win a playoff game for this Sixers team. There is no doubt in my mind between that 3-pointer that he hit with the weird release early on, which he had to go all the way up to catch. That was insane. It looked like he thought about shooting it in midair, then came down, still hit it. And then that block at the end with the little stare down. It was like, he's got some spice to him that I did not realize either. So talk to me about Nico Batum and what you saw with him.
Yeah, dude, I'm beaming. I love Nico. I think, and a lot of Sixers fans, I think, are getting on the same page here. It was maybe a little bit, I don't want to say questionable at the beginning. I think a lot of people just didn't know about Nico Batum. Yeah, but dude, he is so good. He's just he's just so good at everything. And it's the opposite way when we describe Tobias is that is we expect Tobias to be here and he kind of plays always here. Batum's skill set is just so vital. His length. He can switchable defensively. He was guarding Jamal Murray and De'Aaron Fox this weekend. What is that? But he's just so long and smart and tactical in the way that he plays defense. And then offensively, just a connector in every sense. Such a great passer. I do think that they rely on him almost too heavily as an inbound or
entry passer.
Yeah. And because last night, 2 or 3 times when he got the ball, the Nuggets just started to shrink in. They know that he's trying to get the ball to Joel. But dude, the no-dip 3 happened right in the corner where I was. And I was like astonished. I literally like I was there with my sister's boyfriend. I was like, dude, did you see that? The first thing I talked to my friends about this morning at work, I was like, did you guys see the Nico Batum no dip three? He jumped, kept it, and never brought it below his head and released it up here. That's unbelievable. And he's just so much fun. The block at the end and him talking shit. Like,
Yeah.
I didn't know he did that.
Yeah.
And I was just like right there. I was like, oh my God, he's talking shit to Jamal Murray right now. In a huge part of the game. The play was going down the other end and he was still talking shit. It was amazing. Big Nico Batum fan. He was awesome yesterday.
Yeah, I absolutely love it. And this team's got some dogs, man. And another one, probably the loudest barker of the bunch is Pat Bev, man. Pat Bev's a real part of this team. Pat Bev is a real deal, high-level rotation piece and deserves to be on this team. Last night was not one that showed up in the box score as much, that through the game as a whole, he still finished with 8 points, 2 rebounds, 2 assists, and 2 steals. It was 2 of 3 on 3-point attempts. The hook shot, the 3-pointers are back, and defensively, a couple big rebounds. Like there's one particularly that I remember him like going up and getting. That was like a crucial point in the game in the fourth quarter. He's been in the closing lineup for back-to-back games, and really dating back a little further than that. I think this is here to stay. That Pat Bev, and we'll see when DeAnthony Melton comes back how much that changes things a little bit. But I'm all in on Pat Bev, and I another guy that I have zero interest in him wearing any other uniform but a Sixer for as long as he wants to play basketball.
Yeah, last night was an awesome game from Pat Bev, and like the quintessential Patrick Beverley basketball game.
Yeah.
Like he complained about a foul for 4 minutes of play. I'm not kidding you. Like where he clearly fouled Aaron Gordon. He talked to the official about it and was like, he was respectful. Like he kept going back over and saying something and then agreeing and then walking away and then coming back and talking about it again. But the defense on Jamal Murray was fantastic. And just a dude that's like never going to give up and has so much pride that it's insane. The sidestep or step back like 3 right after he hit the layup on Jokic, and then on the other end he comes back down, and I was like, no way, and he hit it. Yeah, great game from Pat Bev, and I was actually listening to the Paul George podcast that he did with Karl Anthony Towns, and they were talking about Pat Bev and how like smart he is when he's talking about the game, and the coaches always like kind of push it away because they have a game plan, and he's like sometimes contradictory. And I feel like him and Nick Nurse have a really strong relationship, that Nurse like trusts him, and the way that he's talked about him over, you know, and the way Pat Bev has talked about it on his podcast is like he takes all that in. He takes that information in. I think he uses Pat Bev's intelligence along with him rather than kind of brushing it off as like you're being crazy. Which I think Pat Bev also feels empowered by. So I like the energy that he brings, and he's been so much fun too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not sure if you saw this quote or not, this from the most recent podcast, but this is Pat Bev here. And first off, I love the belt to ass tour that he keeps flaunting everywhere and saying. But this quote here from Pat Bev, he says, quote, "I texted coach. I had to tell Nurse this Lamborghini is ready for any type of minutes a game. So I texted him a couple weeks ago and told him because I felt like we were in some games. I think I was like at the 12 to 13 minute mark. I told him I can do more. Allow me to do more. And he's going to let me rock a little bit. So I'm fortunate." And it is cool to see that type of relationship. I also love the primary shit talker on the Sixers team going from a minivan to a Lamborghini. Quite the upgrade there. Have to love that. But I do love that from Pat Bev. He definitely has like a respect around the league with referees, with coaches. That is really cool to see. He's absolutely earned his stripes when we talk about a guy who has played overseas, who's played in the G League, who's really got it out the mud, worked his way up, and has turned himself into a legitimate high-level role player beyond all the noise, beyond all the, you know, when you think of Pat Bev throughout his career, it's a lot of these, you know, chest to chest, yelling at refs, clapping in face, slapping floor. But beyond that, there's substance in his play. He is a hooper. He's a guy that is capable in every area of basketball, so high IQ. And I do really appreciate him as a player in a way that I don't think I fully did until this year. I'm getting to watch him on an every night basis. So it's been very cool that has been the case. And I can't speak highly enough. He is all energy all the time. One more guy that I did want to point out here, another guy that I would throw in the dog category is Kelly Oubre Jr. The biggest play that he made that stood out to me last night was early on in that first quarter where he picked off that pass in the backcourt, went and dunked it, got the and one, or he didn't dunk it, finished around the rim, and then he just flexed on him and with a little scratch across his face popping out there. Oubre finished with 11 points, 5 rebounds, a steal. He shot 5 for 9 from the field, just 1 for 4 from 3. But I was really thrilled with what Oubre brought once again. It's not quite like an apples to apples comparison, but it's a little bit like this Aaron Gordon role to me that we're seeing with the Nuggets, where he's like a better player than kind of the role he's being asked to do. but the best version of him is kind of a minimized version of himself. So I'm still loving what Oubre brings, and I do like that, like the extra size that he brings to the lineup as well.
Yeah, he's just another layer, dude. He's very good. He's another guy that, like, when we look back at this, he's a guy like we talk about Batum, like he's good at basically everything. He can handle it. You don't want him to do too much in all of these things. You only want a little bit of most of them. But athletically, he can hang with anybody. He attacks the rim, he puts pressure on the rim. Unlike most of the other guys on this team, he's aggressive in that sense, and he spaces the floor. And only 1 of 4 from 3. But if one more goes in, it's like, oh wow, okay, no, 50% from 3, great. And there's nights where those are going to go in. There's nights where he's going to be 3, 4 of 4 from 3. So there's definitely, for him, I do really like what he brings. And when you said a moment that stuck out, the first thing in my head was that play where he did miss a shot, and then they try to kick it out, and he steals it, gets to the rim, and steals the momentum back a little bit. And Batum did that earlier in the game off of like a loose rebound, or later in the game off like a loose rebound. Those guys just add a little bit more to this team that they have not had in the past. They just are basketball players. They've been in the league for a while. They understand like the important parts of a game, the little intricacies. And like you said at the end, I was going to mention earlier in the show, like the Nuggets are a big team. They're tall. Like it was astonishing to be that, like, there looking at them, and it's like, that's a big ass team. But then you flip it to the other side. If you move Melton to the bench and bring Oubre in, that's a big ass team. Oubre is what, 6'7", 6'8", Batum 6'8", Harris is 6'9", and Embiid is 7'2". Maxey obviously is running around, but the same thing with Jamal Murray. Like, those are 2 big teams, and then you can take Oubre out and put Melton in if they got smaller guards. Like, they got a lot of really good pieces right now, and that's why I think we can kind of turn it towards the next topic of discussion is this trade deadline. I don't think that they're going to go anywhere big. I really don't. It doesn't seem like that's aligning at all. But I don't think that they need something that large. I think they need one more solidifying, like, offensive piece. But from what they have right now, they can make themselves a really versatile team going into the playoffs.
Yeah, and it's tough. There's a report from Shams today basically saying that the Sixers are going to be measured at the trade deadline, that he didn't get the sense that they're going to be all in on kind of the bigger names, those being the DeJounte Murray, Zach LaVine, and Pascal Siakam, who obviously is going to end up in Indianapolis, or has officially. It's been weird how that's all been phrased and reported. But bottom line is, like, Pascal's going to be playing for the Pacers, so can take him off the board there. But I can't figure out, like, where exactly they need. I mean, I guess in theory, like, there's always this perfect player, this versatile, long, athletic wing, but they don't grow on trees, and every team wants them. So it's a little more difficult than that. I wanted to bring up the rebounding in conversation here, that in last night's game, you mentioned the Nuggets are probably the biggest team in the league, but then you think about, like, the Celtics are very much in the Sixers' pathway to winning a title, way more in the forefront of this situation. And they're another big team that they have Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Derek White. They don't have, like, a true guard. Everyone's pretty much above 6'5". Porzingis brings another element to a big man that can shoot. Horford, a similar boat. So this is an issue that they're going to deal with other teams as well. Last night, the Nuggets out-rebounded the Sixers 46-32. They had 16 offensive rebounds compared to just 5 for the Sixers. It's rare when that is the case that you're going to win the ball game. So how much of that do you think is they need to get a guy to help with that? I will say a quick asterisk in here that I think some of that, while Embiid definitely needs to show a better motor on the boards at times, some of that was there were a lot of situations where it ended up with the way that they were matching up. It was Jokic going up for a rebound against whether it be Batum or Tobias or Oubre, and that's just not going to work. So you have to, that's more of a schematic adjustment than a personnel one, but I do think that's still something to note. So how much of that rebounding issue do you think is something they should attack, or do you see another area that's a bigger concern to you?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Yesterday was really apparent that they were not necessarily, like, focused on that portion of the game. It felt like an afterthought with all the other different things that they were doing, and I'm sure that's something that they'll address. And honestly, I do think it comes down sometimes to total team effort rebounding the basketball and making that a priority. And then obviously Joel taking a little bit more pride in it, just going after rebounds a little bit harder. And I think that the Nuggets are uniquely equipped to be a good rebounding team because Jokic is so good at just tapping the ball up. I think I figured out why yesterday too. So this is my theory. He doesn't jump on any of his shots. And he's so big and he has long arms. So, like, he's jumping just a little bit on any shot or rebound. So he's good at the second jump because he can get to the ball quicker. Because he's not going up and then down. He's
Yeah.
kind of just like here the whole time. You know what I mean? Putting pressure on them constantly. That's just my theory. But anyway, to go back to the point, I think it's definitely something that needs to be addressed in a Marcus Morris upgrade. But I also think that in a matchup like this, Robert Covington would have played last night if he was healthy.
For sure. Yeah.
And he would have been the guy that was probably on Jokic for a good portion of it. And he is a good rebounding player, and he's played a little bit of small ball five. I wanted them to go Paul Reed and Joel last night at some point. Too big of a game, too big of moments to do that. But I thought Paul played well yesterday. Anyway, sorry, I'm kind of going off. But anyway, the one guy I want is Bogdanovich. Bogdanovich. I think the biggest thing that would help them, their offense, kind of find that final piece is a motion shooter. Melton does a really good job of catching and shooting, but I don't really often feel like he's creating chaos off the ball, where I think like a Bogdanovich or a Buddy Hield and a high volume 3-point shooter would definitely service them the best at the trade deadline. And I think that's a reasonable thing that they could do.
Yeah, and I wanted to check in the context of the rebounding conversation. Bogdanovich, not a guy that's going to help too much with this, averaging 3.7 rebounds per game this year. The highest he's ever had in his career is 4.3, that back in the Utah days. So not exactly that would be the fix there. I do totally agree with your Covington point that I think that's a solution to me. And by the way, for the Paul Reed conversation, I do think it's a bit telling that coming into the season, there was all this talk from Nick Nurse's direct mouth about how he's going to play Joel and Paul Reed together. And now flash forward, now that we're halfway through the season and we've yet to see it, I do think that's a little bit of an indictment on Paul and kind of the trust level there. And don't get me wrong, like I'm not saying Nurse is wrong for this, that we've definitely seen some flashes of a little bit too much crazy shit, as Marcus Morris calls it, of B-ball Paul. And real quick, shout out Marcus Morris for that huge 4-point play as well. And he's a guy that I think is probably the most likely trade candidate on this team, mostly because of the contract, the $17 million cap hit that comes with him and the way that matches salaries. I'm not as in on Bogdanovich as you, but I can talk myself into it and would be open to it. I did just want to float out one more name for you and kind of wanted to get your vibe check on this because it has been rattling around my brain. Andrew Wiggins is a guy that when he went to the Warriors, that was a quick response there, but I'm not saying I'm for it, but I just rattling around. When he went to the Warriors, he was the perfect like reduced role piece, this Aaron Gordon archetype of guy that settles in. I don't know how much Andrew Wiggins you've watched this year, but it looks like he straight up forgot how to play basketball. Like there's been some embarrassing moments out there. Is there any chance that's a reclamation project with a new location? He looks like the version of himself that you would want to get, or is that not even worth kicking the tires on in your mind?
No, I think like anything that Andrew Wiggins does, Kelly Oubre does it better. And like that's being a genuine, that's like honest to God. That's how I feel. Like what is like I don't like you want him to be an athletic guy that attacks the rim, but like does Andrew Wiggins even do that anymore? And is he efficient in that? I don't think so. Don't really want him catching and shooting, to be completely honest with you. And what else does he do? Like he's friends with Joel. That would be cool to reunite those guys. But I don't think Andrew Wiggins. And for the Bogdanovich, I meant Bogdanovich from the Hawks, not Bojan. I don't want any part of Bojan Bogdanovich, in my opinion, but Bogdan, not like more of a guy that I think can play like the 2 or the 3. He has some size that you kind of forget about, but I envision him the 2 or a 3, kind of wreaking havoc along the 3-point line. I think that would be a fun addition to the Maxey Embiid dribble handoff game that they play. Having a guy like Bogdanovich running off screens and doing random shit on that part of the floor would be like just kind of hell for a defense to try to pay attention to both actions at once. And I think that would be the part that's like that creates a lot of additional offense. So that would be where I think they might go.
Yeah, I guess I look at him as that's more of a guy that I would want in the package if they're going for DeJounte Murray. That if that's the trade package, and I've kind of talked myself into that more and more because I still see value in getting a secondary ball handler, a guy that can play next to Maxey with a little more size. And as much as it's theoretical at this point, there was a point in time where Murray was considered a very good NBA defender. Back in the San Antonio days, I credit a lot of it to Atlanta basically not playing defense these past couple of years to why he's regressed. I still got to believe that he's in there and that Nick Nurse can juice it out of him. But I kind of am more agreeing to your sentiment that I think performances like last night change the tune from the Sixers for how much they need. The bottom line is this comes down to Joel Embiid, as Stan Van Gundy would love to point out. It comes down to him showing up in the playoffs and doing it on the biggest stage. So all these different trades, all these little pieces, it's all about the superstar. But for the time being, I do think you can rest pretty happy after that one, that it doesn't get much better. That you have any final thoughts for that game as a whole? And obviously that they are going to see the Nuggets in a couple weeks, 2 weeks, I believe it is. So you think they get their lick back then, or do you think this is part 2 coming?
Yeah. I mean, last night, I think it makes you feel for sure that this team can contend. I think that that's going to come down to a lot of different things, but in reality, the situation that you kind of come to the conclusion of is there's going to be a top 3 seed in the Eastern Conference. They're going to have a home playoff series, maybe 2. And they are going to have, as long as Joel Embiid is healthy, a legitimate chance to go to the NBA Finals. Will they do it? We don't know. And track record would tell us no. But I think with Nick Nurse and what he does and just watching the way that he coached last night, that makes you feel like you can kind of go anywhere with this guy. And that's a kind of a crazy thing to think, but watching him on the sideline compared to what Doc Rivers used to do, he was up screaming. He was everywhere. Every time out, he was intense. And he made so many adjustments throughout that game. They switched defenses like 12 times.
It's like every time out.
Every time out, Tobias said, like, every time he countered, Nick countered. And to have a guy that's like that involved and is that more involved in the game mentally, it makes you feel like anything can change. And the way that they played last night is the best way that they play basketball. You know, kind of the defensive side wasn't great for the first half, but they can play with anybody.
Yeah,
that's the fact. You know, it's all going to come down to the playoffs, but the situation that you come out of that series or that game thinking is just like, dude, they can play and beat anybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think Nick Nurse has still been undersold for how much of an impact that he's going to make throughout the rest of the season, this playoff run, and everything in between. So a lot to be excited about in the Sixers world right now. Thank you to everybody for tuning into this episode of the Pick Swap Podcast. Make sure that you are smashing that subscribe button, dropping a like on this video. Me and James will be back with you next week after the next big Sixers victory. Peace.